Welcome to episode 60. Language. Join us as we explore how powerful and magical language is and why it's so important. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Witchy Wit podcast, where we look at life through a witchy lens. I'm Kimberlyn.
I'm Leilani.
At Witchy Wit, we explore current events,
ideas,
music and books,
and experiences in ways that recognize energy and life in everybody and everything.
We are both real witches.
And we bring two real perspectives through the lens of our different ages,
races,
and backgrounds.
With a healthy skepticism for what we have been told is true, our conversations are raw, candid, and vulnerable.
Join us as we cast a spell to uncover what we each know is true in our intuitive, witchy selves.
Welcome to episode 60. Language. Yay! So we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in a moment, but why don't we kind of see where we are today outside of language?
Using language, but outside of language.
Exactly. And why did I get us started? Before we even go that far, I should note that we're recording this on Zoom from two different places. I am where I normally am, sitting on my fat happy ass on the sofa here in San Antonio, and I'll come back to my fat happy ass in a moment. In San Antonio. And where are you Zooming from?
I am enjoying myself on spring break in Abilene, Texas.
Woo! Yay! Good. So anyway, I'm going to start with our check-in. I am doing some work with an audio description program here in San Antonio, and one of the things that we decided to do was to go to the Majestic Theater this week and see the show Hairspray, because it was being audio described by a different outfit from up in Austin. And so we got there and got the headsets. We wanted to actually try to perceive it as a low vision person would. So we spent a lot of times with our eyes closed, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, are you familiar with the story of Hairspray?
I'm not.
It's about a girl, a full-figured gal who wants to be on it. It takes place in Baltimore, which is a highly racialized city, or at least it is still. But it definitely was in the 60s. It was notable for being highly racialized. She wanted to break into, there was a television show that was like a song and dance show that was all high school kids in Baltimore, and she wanted a chance to be on that show. And so it was all about her getting, auditioning for the show and getting on the show, and then realizing that only one night out of the month they had what they called Negro Night, which is when the black kids could sing and dance and do, what they called race songs at the time, race records. And, or they might have called it R&B at that point. I can't remember, but originally they called them race songs or race records. And then she was a part of helping to kind of integrate the show so it wasn't just Negro Night, that they could be on other nights. Now, there were other issues with this show, the white savior that, I had a little difficulty with. And with musicals, I often have difficulties with the underlying principles that are expressed in it, but, you can still enjoy it. But and I don't know if it was just because I'm becoming more and more sensitized to it, but one of the points of this is that she and her mother, who in the original was played by Divine, and it's a role that the mother is always played by a male, dressed as a woman. So it's a drag role, but they're both big, and so the mother has issues with self-esteem and food and things like that, and that comes up again and again in songs and in the dialogue. But the daughter is also big, but she dances, and she dances. Let me tell you that she was dancing in this. But what struck me about this was that there's these two other characters. One is kind of the beauty queen of the teen, like the homecoming queen type of gal, and her mother, who is the producer of the show, and how they treat the girl who's trying to audition for the show. And the number of fat jokes that were a part of this. And and obviously at the end they get their comeuppance, but just how ubiquitous they were. And it just reminds me that as a culture, we have moved away from making fun of or making big points about people with disabilities. We've moved away from, like jokes about Black people or Polish people, that kind of stuff. And kind of like the last frontier has been weight. And so, recently with Lizzo and people like that, we've seen a lot more body positivity. But I think back to just even reading Harry Potter. Did you read the Harry Potter books? Okay, so
yeah, I've read all of them.
Okay, so the jokes that they made about his cousin who was big and his uncle who was big.
Yeah.
The point, she was going into the fact that they were also abusive and not right thinking, etc. But the comments, and so I don't think I have a conclusion here, but I just think it's poignant because we're talking about the power of language and the power of words today, at how even still that's a part of our culture. And when you see it in a cultural artifact, which is a musical, so art is there to help us to understand something, ourselves, our emotions, whatever. And by putting it at a safe distance from us, right? So I don't have to feel the emotions of, if I'm watching something about a lynching, I don't have to literally be in that, but I can take a moment to observe and to get some lessons from it, if I so desire. And it's also a creation of our culture. So it's there because it's there in our, and so by seeing that on the stage, I kind of, it just kind of like hit myself in the head. It's like, oh my God, and recognize that there's still this. So I'm going to say one other thing. There's still this fat shaming, but in a different way. So what we see today is people, instead of talking about, well, you're fat, so that means you overeat and you're lazy and you don't have any discipline, we see that, well, we're just concerned about your health, right? And, weight, it's going to cause you this and that and the other. And so it's kind of crept in. There's a safe way of doing the same thing. And I think that's the big part of it. I mean, it wasn't a safe way on that show. They were just fat shaming. But there was, but even today, when that's no longer socially acceptable, there's still ways that creeps into our language. Okay, thank you for allowing me to share that. Check.
Something, I don't really, I have like a comment that's more like a question, but I don't know that it's answerable. But something that I think about in situations similar to what you're saying is, what do I do with art that may have been progressive for the time, but now is antiquated? And just like noticing that. And I know people have literally written books about this, so I am in no place to be an expert on it. And it's just something that I confront in my life as a consumer of art, of poetry, of books, of plays, of musicals, even television.
Yeah, there is no, I'm sure there's an answer. I don't have it, but yeah. Anyway, so thank you for allowing me to share that. It was just something that I was kind of forcibly confronted with on Sunday afternoon at a matinee downtown. A lovely afternoon, but yeah. And cultural stuff. Deep thoughts, as I think it was Johnny Carson used to say, deep thoughts. So what about you? Is there anything in particular you'd like to share?
I would like to share. I'd like to check in about my birthday party, which I'm so grateful that you attended. After you went to a concert.
I went to the symphony. And then after the symphony concert, it was like Beethoven, Mozart, two contemporary composers, and I can't remember who the other composer was. After that, I hopped into my car and drove to your place.
And went to a phone party.
So tell us more.
So I wanted to check in. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke about, a couple episodes ago, I spoke about having the phone party and how I was feeling I was feeling some anxiousness around it, and you helped me reframe it in that I was being courageous and vulnerable and doing something that was different and expressive of like what I was desiring for a celebration. I also read this book that was recommended to me by a podcaster, and it called The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. And so it's all about the art of gathering. It's all about how to create a gathering that's intentional, which I really, really liked. So it's not like a Martha Stewart guide, like you need to use this type of fork first and then have this type of place setting and make sure you have a cocktail before this. Like, it's not like that type of art of gathering. It was about how to create an intentional gathering from conception through the end of the gathering. And also like the words I would use, the ending of the gathering or death, and like how we can embrace death or endings in our culture, and like close out the gathering. And so it was really cool. And I'm really happy with my 40th birthday being a foam party. We transformed my garage into a foam party by lining it with plastic sheeting. And then my partner's brother set up professional lights. And then we had we used an AI DJ. So just so everybody knows, like, it was pretty cool. We had an AI mix music, and then a bunch of my friends came over, and like we put up other lights, like laser lights, and then we built the foam machine, and it was really fun. I thought it was really fun and unique, and I was really happy. It was very small. I had a handful of women from our circle there, and then I had a handful of people from my acro community that I am really close to, and then I had my brother and my sister there. So it was pretty small, and I'm really happy that I put myself out there and took a risk, because it was risky. At one point in time, the foam machine backfired and shot foam up onto my partner's face, which I thought was pretty hilarious. But I wanted to say thank you to you for supporting me and encouraging me whenever I was experiencing those like vulnerability worries. And it was a cool process to have us have that conversation. So then as I was experiencing that anxiety around how it was going to go, I was able to reframe it and then move into like a space of understanding why I was having those feelings. And then that helped me have them, and then not kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater with those feelings. So I'm very excited that it happened, and I have a lot of fond memories from it. And I think that is a wonderful thing to have from a 40th birthday party.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. May I respond to something that you said in your chat?
Yeah.
So one thing I want to say, first of all, is thank you so much for sharing your anxiety, your whatever, your concerns or whatever about the whole thing, because I feel really honored that you were able to be vulnerable with me. For one, I was honored that you kind of brought that to me for me to hold that space for you. So I really appreciate that, and also thank you, because you are such a capable person. When it's like spreadsheets and this and the organization and reading the book, so you know how to do this and the blah, 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 that I really appreciated being able to see a little bit behind the curtain and see that while you are so good at this, you too wonder, is this going to work, or is this a good idea, or is that kind of thing. And because you have so many great ideas and you have such good implementation, and you're so good about getting people together and getting them to kind of pull together and that sort of thing. I don't know if I would have known that had you not shared that with me, because it just seemed to me from like point A to B to like be this fun, smooth, funky, different Leilani type of thing. And so I appreciate being able to recognize that there's sometimes another little Leilani thing in there that may not necessarily be visible. So I'm honored, and I appreciate, and I thank you.
Thank you. I think that is something harkening back to maybe like 1 or 2 episodes ago with Brene Brown about the power of vulnerability. And sometimes I don't even slow down enough to notice it, but it is something that I want to do more and just share that in a transparent way. It might not even change what I do, but it might change how I do it.
Totally.
So words are important.
Yeah, words are very important.
I shared my experience of sharing, and then the words you said to me really made an impact. So,
and that smoothly segues us into our topic for today, which is language. We just said language, but I'm wondering if we want to make it the power of language.
I think so.
Because I think so much as we always create a little outline that we at least start from, whether or not we work with it all the time is kind of up for grabs. But so much of what we put on there was just about like the immense fucking power of words. And so I think maybe we can reflect that in the title of our of the episode.
I think you're right. The power of language is super important. Do you want to start talking a little bit about why we selected this episode topic?
No, I'll let you do that. I mean, I'd love to, but I can't remember.
Well, okay. So a couple of reasons I think that bubbled up for me, and I think for you, hopefully this will resonate for you. One is that I recently was on the team that ran our retreat for our circle a couple of weeks ago. And as we were planning, the other facilitator and I were planning the retreat, we were trying to be really conscious about the language that we used in the retreat to be empowering to the right things, the things that we wanted to empower, and not disempowering to certain things. And then we were also really cautious about thoughtful in the ways that we wanted to use language in our ritual. And that stirred up some conversation amongst the other facilitator and I, as well as some of the retreat attendees, as well as between you and I. And then I also heard, as you were preparing to facilitate a ritual for our circle, I also noticed that it was really apparent whenever I went to your ritual planning in how you were creating and structuring the ritual.
Thank you. Thank you for the reminder. Like the minute you said that, oh yeah. Okay, right.
Sometimes it's a deer in headlights thing where it's like, I don't remember what it was.
Exactly. No, I think that's so important. We'll actually come back to this when we start talking about the impact of words in ritual. But yeah, I think this is one of the things our culture is gradually beginning to recognize, is the power of words and the power of language, that it's not just communicating. Well, it is communicating, but it's communicating a whole lot more than what we think it is, or we may recognize at the moment. And as podcasters, obviously, as podcasters, I would imagine that many of us would recognize how powerful what we say, and there's these words are these teeny weeny little sounds. Like this is another sound, but black they're the same length. They don't have the same phonemes, but the idea is that they can have such power, and that's because of the power that we've invested in them. Yeah, they're. I think how beautiful it is as a culture that we've created all of these fabulous codes, and then also how shitty we can treat in the ways in which we use some of those codes. But I mean, on a certain level, it's magnificent, all these little just sounds, and we put them together in such masterful ways. Yeah.
Yes, an English teacher and a lover of books and poetry, I really love words. I mean, I read etymological dictionaries for fun. Like, we were just having a conversation before we started recording, and I was like looking up the etymology of a word, and we had to stop that because I was going to go down a rabbit hole. I also had like an interesting experience a couple of weeks ago where I was talking to somebody and I mentioned a lazy Susan, like for if anyone doesn't know what that is, it's like a turntable that you put on your table for food, and you can like spin it around. And the person I was talking to, I said something about a lazy Susan, and this person was like, "Hey, did you know that the lazy Susan was invented by this man because his wife didn't want to have to get up and walk around the table to move something to the other side of the table for a family member? So her husband made it and then put it on the table so that she could spin it. And he called her lazy, and her name was Susan. And that's why it's a lazy Susan." And I was like, that's interesting. So it really should be like a lazy Frank or a lazy whatever his name was. But it was kind of a funny moment, but it's like really stuck with me. And I thought like, oh my gosh, like how long have I been perpetuating this cycle of, because that woman was not lazy. If she's making,
she made the damn dinner. You know, she made the damn dinner,
right? Right.
Put all those things and put all those spices on the table, and we don't know what the situation was, but he couldn't hand her a damn spice.
Right. But my thought is like, you can't stand up and walk around and grab the ketchup or whatever, like, and you're going to call her lazy after she's been, of course, without knowing any more of the context or anything. But like, it really like stuck with me. I think because of all the work and the thought that we've been giving in our circle about the power of language and the way that's bled over into my life, and the ways that we use language, oftentimes subconsciously, to keep the status quo going, to promote the things that our culture says are promotable, and then to repress the things that our culture says should be repressed. So even like you going to see Hairspray and like those jokes, is like, I would argue a not so subtle, but subtle way of being like, ha ha ha, it's okay to make fun of fat people. Ha 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 ha. I mean, even though they get their comeuppance in the end, but I'm imagining some people laughed at those jokes.
I guess well, a lot of them, yeah, I guess they did. I just cringed more and more and more over the course of that. Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
but just the way that we use it to signal. I think a lot of it is signaling, where we're signaling like, this is okay, this is not okay, this is okay, this is not okay.
And even though we knew that the people who were using those words are not people we would emulate, that they were kind of the villains of the musical, the writers made the puns or the play on words so funny that you can't help but appreciate it, even though you know you shouldn't. Mm-hmm. Or not know you shouldn't, but even though you know they're hurtful. And so that's a little bit of emotional dissonance, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyway, I think there's so much, and I keep saying we're going to talk about it in a second, but there's so much power that is invested in our agreement around those words. See, that's the most important thing. I think I have this, the ways in which they kind of reinforce our worldview is one way. When we decided we were going to do this, I went to a site on conscious language. It's called Conscious Style Guide, and I'm going to try to remember to put the URL for it in the show notes. But it's called the Conscious Style Guide, and then the subtitle is Include, Empower, and Respect. And the author is a woman of Chinese descent. I think she's an American. She's a United States citizen. And so one of the things that she found that she had difficulty with is she would say Happy Chinese New Year. and then recognizing that the more inclusive term is Lunar New Year. But the part that she was kind of working her way through in the blog post that I read was how there's certain words that just have these comfortable aspects to them, and they're exclusionary, right? And so as she's confronting these things and making an effort to be more inclusive in her language, she's kind of having to give up. I think you mentioned the loss of that, and she calls the title of that episode is "Breaking Up with Words." But recognizing that when you say Chinese New Year, well, what about Koreans, Vietnamese? That by saying that we're creating a worldview that reinforces a power hierarchy, that reinforces a status of what we value, and just then reinforces a laziness on our part. It's just easier for some people to say Chinese New Year as opposed to thinking through there's a whole third of the planet who observes this who are not Chinese. Mm-hmm. And so causing a great deal of thinking, or avoiding, obviating a great deal of thinking. That was I should say obviate was the word that Leilani started looking up.
So interesting.
It's a very interesting word.
So then I can see, so if we just ride this Chinese New Year versus Lunar New Year language, so I can see how it would, some people would get their feathers ruffled with this idea of like, well, but I thought that the Chinese celebrate, so why can't I say Chinese New, whatever. And I think it's a really great example of, whenever I learn something, I want to constantly be making adjustments in my life in order to walk in this world as compassionately and as respectfully and as inclusively and as lovingly as possible. And so that's and for me, it doesn't matter how old I get. I want to constantly be open to that. Now, I've heard people say, oh, that's like wokeness, or that's like, such a snowflake. Like, why can't we just call it a Chinese New Year, or whatever. But I just want to like empathize and say one thing I can understand is like, it can be challenging whenever I realize that I have not been as compassionate or as aware as I thought that I was. Like, that can be hard, and like, there are moments in my life where I have been confronted with that, where I've been embarrassed, I've been ashamed, I've been sad. I felt like this sense of like I might have like wronged people in the past, and it can be a challenge to think one way of myself and then have something pointed out or realized, and then just be like, oh my gosh, like as an English teacher, like, okay, this is personal. As an English teacher, I used to write on my students' essays, they is a plural pronoun, use a singular.
Yes.
I would write that in red ink on my students' essays. Now I know better. Now I know, and I understand, and it is embarrassing for me to think about that there is somewhere with my handwriting, which I think is magically and energetically like important, that I wrote on someone's, I'm imagining someone somewhere can look at an essay and see that. And it hurts me. Like, if I think about what if there was a student who wanted they, them pronouns used, and that's the way that they identify. And I wrote that on, like I go down these rabbit holes in my mind. Now, of course I say like, well, now I know better. I'm going to do better, but like, it's a really powerful reminder for me that like, what would it be like for some people to bump up against these things where they are uncomfortable by what's being pointed out, and that it would require work on their part to adjust their worldview. And that is a hurdle that can be uncomfortable. And so I am empathetically trying to understand that that's maybe what people bump into. And so then how can I meet them where they are and like help them over that bump.
Right. So you said there's so much in there that I want to respond to, and I can't, or we'd be here all night. But first of all, I get that humbling feeling when I realize that my words have impact, and then that I didn't use the right words when I realized that, and that there is the instance where perhaps those words might have been actively harmful to the person that I was discussing, or maybe less directly. For example, there is someone, as teachers, we know pretty much like 90% of what we say will not be retained, right? But of the 10%, the part that some student that you had 20 years ago or 15 years ago will remember will be that one lesson, and that they're going to have to overcome it because they drilled it and drilled it and drilled it because you said that that it was important, and so and as you say, it's one of those things where as society's growing, it's only growing because the individuals are growing, right? And so you knew something then, you know something now. I knew something then, I knew something now. And all we can do is do some conscious language work or some rituals around, reclaiming all of those poor choices we made in the past, and et cetera. Anyway, and that's, to me, again, a part of the magic of language is that it does change. And it changes to reflect our change in consciousness. And our sense of community and our sense of self and our sense of our position in the world. And even though that I'm often faced with that power because of something that might have been harmful or negative, if I sit back and think about it, there's all these wonderful ways in which it has been positive, so I don't know if that helps, but just something in there. And so you mentioned like one of the, some of the reasons that people may not, we recognize that language is powerful and that it can be used to kind of keep the status quo, keep maintaining what already exists going. But as we think about why people might be resistant to that, some of it is just that there is comfort, there is history or some sort of personal, emotional investment in terms like that reflect maybe a binary, like mother and father, or as opposed to saying parents, yeah, because the picture of mother is such a powerful one. So there's as we talk with people who may not be as open to understanding inclusive language, I find that that's helpful for me to just recognize, yes, in some cases, there's just this huge emotional investment that I can't make people tackle. I can't make people address, and I wouldn't want to, because then that means that they have the responsibility of doing that to me. But maybe just opening them up by showing the ways in which there can be a beautiful way of talking about parents. And there could be a beautiful way of using, person instead of woman and man. I don't know if that's even our responsibility, but I think that there is a power in that intention, at least, when confronted with some resistance. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I feel that I feel similar to you in that I really want to make sure my words are signaling what I feel, which is that I am opening myself to seeing and being and learning who somebody is, instead of assuming or printing onto them what I think they should be. So asking somebody, hey, oh, hi, I'm Leilani, blah, 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 blah. How do you identify? And then they can tell me what they want to be called instead of me making an assumption. They can tell me who they are. They can tell me about their family instead of like, oh yeah, do you live with your mom? Well, no, I have two dads, and as somebody whose life, and I think this is probably true for everybody in some way, and also for me as somebody whose life has not gone on the culturally traditional path of, marriage, kids, whatever, a traditional, like a more traditional faith, or, there's in some ways I fit the traditional, like American, whatever, but in a lot of ways I don't. And so I bump into those pretty frequently, and it can be, I find myself, sometimes I find myself getting pretty darn frustrated with them, in some moments I'm like, oh, in other moments I have more ability to just let them roll off my back. But as somebody who experiences those, what some people might call microaggressions, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be a part of that, especially because the things for me are relatively small, but for other people, I can't even imagine if their life is even more in contrast to what our normal, air quotes, normal language would signal is like acceptable. Like that's got to be a huge challenge. And I don't want to be a part of that. Like I want to be a part of supporting and uplifting. And so if it just takes me adjusting some of my words, then I'm all about that.
One of the thank you for sharing that. One of what's coming out of that for me is a reminder. This was a couple of years ago. And I can't remember. I think it was around. I can't remember what the workshop was around. Maybe disability or something like that. But one of the things that the facilitator said, and it just popped into my head again. I hadn't thought about it since then. Is instead of making these assumptions based on what you think you see, what I think I see, if I could instead of all of that, just picture kind of this blob of light. And then talk to that person like they're a blob of light. And so not making any sort of assumptions, opening up the conversation based on what I know. So in many cases, like when a student comes into my class, all I know is their name, their class, what year they're in at school, and maybe their student ID, which is helpful for nothing. So just knowing that name, I don't know necessarily anything else. And so what would that conversation look like if I started there? And in so many cases, life would be simpler for me if I did that elsewhere as well. Just start it with the name, or start it with whatever fact I know that this is a friend of this person, and say, oh, okay. And then start there and trying not to make implications through my words about anything else.
What you just said, like really sparked a new thought. And of course, there are people who study this for a living. There are people who write books about this for a living. So this is just, I hope our listeners are sensing that this is just a discussion between two people who are doing, I'm going to speak for you, two people who are doing the best that they can, trying to figure this out, in the trenches of teaching and ritual creation and having a circle and having a community of friends, but anyway, so as I listened to you, it just blew my mind. One of the things that you said, because I was thinking like, well, you're coming at that from a real place of curiosity and compassion. And I could imagine that there might be some people who are used to coming from a place of entitlement of like, no, I say that you are. Instead, you're not a blob of light. You're walking in here looking a certain way. So I'm going to make some assumptions because I'm entitled to make assumptions about your gender and about your name, maybe, or about your family structure, or about a lot of things. And so again, going back to that, me attempting to have understanding and empathy for where these people may be and why there's such resistance to it. And if I have been walking around the world thinking that I'm a place of privilege to make assumptions, that would make me, I wouldn't like that. Like I would really have to rethink my place in the world instead of saying it's my right to make assumptions about you, instead coming at it from it's my place, it's my choice to be open to who you are and listening to that.
Totally. Ugh. Yes, exactly. Like I want the category, so then I can bring everything I know about that category to bear, whether or not you fit it or not, whether or not it's even your category. Yeah, totally. I love that thought. I mean, I don't love the thought, but thank you for sharing some of the underlying principles that allow me to think about that in a much more objective way.
Yeah. As something who, as someone who has had something happen a number of times, like one thing that I've noticed is as I get older, one thing that in words that a little example is like when people talk about starting a family, it's just a microaggression. Like for our listeners can't see me, like I'm kind of rolling my eyes and doing like air quotes, but like I find that phrase, like I feel a sting in my heart when people say that, because for me, it implies that a family has to have children. And what does that mean? Well, then that means that you don't I don't have a family if I don't have children. So what does that mean? So that I'm familyless? And of course, no one has ever come up to me and said, hey, Leilani, you don't have a family until you have children. Must suck for you because you don't have a family. No one has ever said that to me. And also it's just like, I think it's an example of the way language is used to perpetuate the status quo. And of course, probably there was a lot of investment around people wanting people to have children for a long time. And I think that it's something that I have now changed it. So I don't say, like, I have a friend who's pregnant and I haven't told her, oh, I'm so excited you're starting a family. I've used words like, I'm so excited to watch your growing family. I'm so thrilled to see you and your partner choose to grow your family in this way, acknowledging that there is a family beforehand. So it's just, for me, it's an example of that, of how microaggressions are not so micro, and especially if somebody has a lot of hurt or pain, those little things, those little words can really land with someone in a big way. And so I want to make sure that I'm trying to use language in a way that's as uplifting and inclusive as possible.
Yeah. And I it's so funny when you said that, I didn't realize how charged even the word family is. So as a single person, what does that mean? Like, do I not exist because, like I'm one of those things that are outside of the norm? And so look, for me, my family is not someone I've professed to be a partner with or whatever. My family, you're my family. A mutual friend that we have is my family. So the idea that the family is kind of the pillars of society, again, it's one of these ideas that I would suggest are one of these tacit, quote unquote, doing air quotes, quote unquote, tacit understandings of what our society consists of. And they are important aspects, but they're not the only ones. And so even, again, just having this conversation has made me just sit back and think, oh, okay, what does that word mean for me? What does that word mean for me? And it obviously, maybe not obviously, but I would imagine that we can't do that all the time, or no communication would actually take place. However, the little bit that did take place would be super intentional, super meaningful, and actually probably say the things that we want to say. We were having this conversation about in terms of ritual, a ritual that I'm planning, and I was saying that I'm giving a great deal of thought to this kind of stuff and trying not to be paralyzed by it, right?
Yeah, I liked your comment. I liked your comment whenever you said that.
Yeah. And I'm just going to, this is a sidebar. A friend, this was easily 30 years ago because I'm that old, but we decided that we weren't going to use the word like in our conversation unless we actually were making a comparison. And I remember there was a 15-minute slot there where we just kind of stared at each other because we could, every time we tried to start something, we could feel the word kind of creeping in, so we'd stop and try to rethink that. And, oh my gosh, it's amazing how grooved we've gotten in our language. And if we thought a thought about it the way we're thinking about it today, it would totally slow us down until we got used to it and made choices that were more reflective of what we really are trying to say.
So what if, like, my question is, what if I looked at it instead of, I'm going to totally overhaul my closet and throw out all my clothes and get an entirely new wardrobe, and then I'm thinking, oh shit, like I don't know what to buy, I don't know what to do. Like, what if it was just, I'm just gonna do one shirt at a time. Do I want this shirt? No, I'm gonna toss this one out. I'm gonna take it to Goodwill and I'm gonna look for a different black tank top, right? Mm-hmm. And instead of I'm going to revamp all of my language, what if I just said, I'm going to look at the way I use the word family for right now and be okay with the fact that there's other shirts in my closet. There's other words, and just be okay with one tank top at a time. Right. Mm-hmm. And sure, that is a long process, and being paralyzed by fear of not doing anything means I'm going to stay stuck, So one thing that I did is on the same podcast, in my check-in, I talked about the podcaster who recommended The Art of Gathering. And that same podcast, years ago, she mentioned that she was going to stop using the word crazy. Because somebody pointed out to her that was really hurtful for them as somebody that had a family member with mental illness, and that, it was just wasn't a great word for them. And it made me think like, oh yeah, like that is true. As somebody who has been in therapy since I was like 16 or something like that, and who's taken medication for depression and anxiety and panic attacks and things like that. Like I had an investment in it. So then I thought, okay, I'm going to do that. So I'm going to change my language. Instead of crazy, I say bananas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's just, again, that's just one tank top that I could look at a time, and then I looked at starting a family. That's a crop top.
No, it's true. It's very, very true. I said no. I don't know why I said no. Yes. Wow. Okay. No. Yeah. I must say that a lot.
I don't think you do, but
okay.
I don't know.
Oh, I think maybe so here's the thing. That word keeps coming out. Is there something I'm resisting about this conversation, right?
Right. Oh. I feel it too. Like, is there something that I'm bumping up against, mm-hmm. It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable, and it's unknown, and that can be a challenge.
Yeah. But I just found it so funny that I just popped up with the word no. And so I need to sit with that. There's some sort of, something that's going on behind the scenes, like in the back of my head, that I need to address. Anyway, but let's move on with our podcast. That's something I can do.
So let's not even get started with like the no, yeah, or the yeah, no, which as somebody who loves language, that personally drives me bonkers. Absolutely.
Push me, pull you. I know. I feel it's push me, pull you, which in our society is also a good thing, right? Not a good thing, but it's something, a part of our society is basically keep us all the same. No growth, no change, no difference. And by being push me, pull you is stagnant, right? You're not going anywhere. So that totally makes sense. Okay. Anyway, so let's talk. So we were talking about, the power of words. And one of the things that I think that I have been really doing some work with over the past few years, and hence the website that I mentioned, is conscious language, because I totally committed to the idea that words have such power, particularly, I mean, obviously we're talking about in communication with someone else, but even in our own heads, that words reinforce, it can reinforce negative self-image. I mean, it can reinforce a lot of things, but in my case, I've been confronted with the ways in which my words reinforce behaviors, beliefs, fears, that I've had for many years, and that by just being really conscious and cognizant of that power, that's allowed me to be a little bit more intentional in my inner thoughts. For example, using the word should, the implications of that, the societal constraints that I've taken on to myself when I say I should do something, I should do this, I should do that. And that's been something that I've been confronting for years, and obviously not super adept at yet, or not as adept as I would like to be. But it's just thinking about that has been super, super powerful for me.
One thing that you have shown me, and that I've learned from your example, is framing my words in a way that open myself up to abundance. And a phrase that you use is this or something better. And I see you use that in magical spaces as well as in like everyday life. And sometimes I think about that, where if I say this is what I want, I'm limiting myself. I'm limiting myself to whatever I said. I'm limiting myself to X. When the truth is that my partner, my friends, my family, my work, my spiritual community, the sacred may have more. And in essence, I'm staking a flag on this one thing, and I'm like, this is what I want, and instead of being like, I am open to this or something better. And like, how simple is that? But also how mind blowing is that? And how many ways in my life do I just limit myself to whatever that is, instead of being open to the possibilities of even something more abundant, more magical, more meaningful coming into my life?
Oh yeah, totally. And the fact that, so in many of the faith traditions around the world, we have a recognition of the power of words. We have prayer, we have mantras, we have spells in our tradition, and how limiting it can be to only think of them in those contexts. But recognizing that even though I might be doing a spell, or I might be doing magical work, say 1 out of 24 hours in the day, I am still using words the other, maybe not 23 because I'm hopefully sleeping, but I'm still using words the rest of those times. And so is it only magical when I say, dear God, and then say some words? Or when I'm sitting in meditation and chanting words, or making them poetic or something like that? Or is it possible that they're powerful all of the time? And when I'm thinking them, when I'm saying, you idiot, you did that again. Or when I'm saying, oh my God, she chose that dress, or, am I perpetuating, am I recognizing the potential of the words that I'm using to create magical space, or to create a powerful positionality for myself and the person that I'm sharing contact with?
Yeah. One thing that I try to do, and I am human, and a fucking
fabulous human, I just want to say.
Thank you. But like, one thing I do whenever I'm at the gym and I'm exercising, I try to say affirmations to myself, instead of being like, you are so unhealthy, I hate this part of my body. Like, why isn't it changing faster? And sometimes I do find myself thinking those things, ugh, I hate the way I look in this. Oh my gosh, look at it, and then I try to catch myself. And then as I'm exercising, I try to say things in my mind. Like, look how strong you are. Like, look how functional your body is. Look how you can bend over and pick this thing up and you can move like that. Look how, your hips are allowing you to squat so low. This is amazing. I'm so grateful for my body. Look how healthy I feel right now in this moment. I try to like affirm and state things instead of the negative, because like you said, I think that language does have this energy. And if I try to think of like words as like buckets, and every time I say something, I'm adding energy into this bucket. And whenever I use a word, I invoke all of the energy that has previously been added into that bucket of that word or that idea. And so, especially in a magical space, but also in my everyday life, I want to be mindful that whenever I tap into an energy stream that's connected to that word or phrase, I want to make sure I'm really mindful and tapping into what I really, really want. So even in my example at the gym, I want to tap into an empowering, healthy, loving energy stream instead of one that is disempowering or hateful or negative.
Right. I mean, yeah. I mean, I keep using the word power, but that's the one that keeps leaping to mind. That energy stream that you're tapping into, it's there. And then, if you're tapping into it in a way that's going to be harmful to yourself, or if you're tapping into it in a way that's going to be empowering and uplifting, etc., that it's there. And so how we tap into it by virtue of the words that we use are so important, in my opinion.
I do want to say one thing though, that's not, I don't think it's contrary to everything we've been saying. It's just a nuance to it. And it's that one time I had a pap smear that came back as having precancerous cells on my cervix. And I'm really grateful. Like I go to my OB every year. I promise this has to do with words, but I go to my OB every year. So it was caught, but it was a scary thing, especially because I had recently gotten divorced. And so like my entire support structure was shaken. And like, I was just in a really tough spot in my life. And somebody who loved me very much said to me, create health and not cancer.
Yes.
And I appreciated what they were saying, right? Like I need to create health in my life and not cancer. And also in that moment, I was like, fuck you.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
Like, are you implying that I created these cells on my cervix,
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, of course, like if I smoke, like I am likely creating the possibility for cancer in my lungs, like, yes, we do have some ownership and some power over some things. And also some of it is the life lottery and the way things go. Right. So like, I just wanted to point out that like there could have been a more nuanced way that person who was really loving me in that moment and really wanting to support me in that moment also taught me that big lesson in that moment, which is like, I need to be careful because how I am implying language can really impact somebody. And like, that was a really powerful moment for me that, like the way I use my language, like does not undo millennia of like systematic oppression of certain people and groups and things. And it, and I also don't want it to be performative where I'm like, oh, look, I'm using cool language, but then my actions do something else. My actions say something else, like I want my words to be in alignment with my actions. So it's not this thing that I can use to just erase everything else in my history or in my behavior. But I just want to point out that like language is really powerful. And I would have loved that signaling to have been more of a supportive signaling. I think that person was really trying and probably scared for me. And, so they might not even know that that's how it landed with me to this day. But it was a really impactful experience to be in that vulnerable state and then to have someone say something like that for me. And at first it just landed. I was like, I don't like something about this. And it took me a while to kind of process it and to dig up why it was that way.
Yeah. Two things I think I want to respond to in what you said is I can sense the concern, the love, the emotion, that they brought in, and I'm guessing that was apparent, even if the words didn't land properly. And then there's also, I don't know how to put this, because I'm so words are powerful symbols that we use to communicate. They're tools for communication. They're tools for getting an idea out of my head and into your head as authentically and maintaining its internal integrity as possible, right? So when I communicate something to you, I would prefer it to not have all these accretions that were not there when I gave it to you, right? And so a part of what we're talking about is dealing with the initiation, the thought itself, and what that might imply for us, but it also then that process of getting it from my brain to my mouth, from my mouth out in the air, out in the ether, and then into your ears and into your brain. And then it's like telephone, the game telephone, when you start it and then where it ends might be dramatically different. And so best practices in communication are to help us to get all of those things, address all of those things between my mouth and your ear. And even to a lesser extent, or to a different extent, from my brain to your brain. And so I'm eventually getting back to what you said. And so a part of that is a part of that is learning and understanding what all those obstacles or accretions might be between me and between the pitcher and the catcher, okay, in terms of language, what I'm sending out and what you're actually getting. And then being able to kind of work your way through it so that those words don't pick up all that stuff. So, or knowing what those things might be. So when I start the word, I can address that so that you can hear as much as possible what I'm trying to say. And what was the phrase?
Oh, the phrase was, create health, not cancer. That person was loving me and was like, take control of your life and let's put all of the energy that you can into health, not cancer, right? Like, I think they were really loving me. And the way it landed was, fuck off. Mm-hmm. You're telling me I created these pre-cancer cells on my cervix?
Gotcha. Yes. This is definitely going to be an episode where we're going to need a part 2, because we're already, at an hour and we haven't even discussed half of the stuff that we want to say. I would love to kind of follow up on what you just said in terms of words and the fact that they are so powerful, but there's certain things that they can't do. Like, so the idea that you said using words cannot undo centuries of systematic oppression. And we talked about this kind of briefly, but I'd like to talk a little bit more about performative language. And so we're seeing a period of time here where a lot of institutions are recognizing that their languaging in terms of their marketing or in terms of, how they're presenting, et cetera, is reinforcing a status quo that perhaps they're trying to move away from, or at least let me be more generous and offer some grace that they're trying to move away from. And so I see a lot of that performative language. I was just on a committee at my institution where we're trying to look at what the power structures are and then position ourselves as faculty within that in a way that actually reflects what we need to have input on so that we can do our jobs. And one of the things that we see, as I was doing an examination last summer, a number of institutions and how they were handling things like shared governance. And so much of that language to me was very performative in as much as this is what's on the website and it's totally different from what's actually taking place on the ground. But they know the buzzwords. They know what to say so that they can position themselves as this very inclusive, very open, willing to discuss, et cetera, et cetera. And I know some of those institutions. I know, and they're not that way. And And we see that with allyship, in a number of different community, allying with a number of different segments of our community. And having said that, and then I'm going to give you a chance to talk. We need people, even if they're not totally committed to it. We need the words. We need them to get there by just saying the words, because hopefully by saying the words enough time, and there's another part of that, but at least by saying the words enough time, that kind of gets those words kind of cemented in the psyche. And the words need to be layered on top of, and then and also supported by, and also buoying up actions.
Yeah, so like chicken and the egg, right? Like which comes first, the words or the behavior, or both,
Yeah. And right now I'm give me the performative at least to get started, right? Because by saying that, then you have to start looking at, okay, I've said this. Okay, am I putting my money where my mouth is? Am I putting my actions behind what I'm saying? And so that's at least a start. But some people are figuring, okay, check that box. We've got Atlantic acknowledgement, and we're good to go. And so it's lip service. They're paying lip service to the ideas that they're promulgating in their work, and they are also not doing anything about that. And so words can have a great deal of power, and words don't necessarily have all the power that we need them to have.
And maybe that's like a good place for us to talk about on our part 2, which I imagine we're going to have, because geez, we have so much more to say. Is like when we go to this ritual space, we want to make sure. I think our circle is in alignment with this, and especially the leadership. And I'll just talk about myself. I want to make sure that this language that I'm using, is not performative. And there's also an awkward phase where I'm learning these new language terms, and I'm learning the way, like substituting one word for a different word that I think is like more inclusive or has more of the energy that I'm wanting, or I'm instituting, speaking of acknowledging the land that we're on, and I'm going to make mistakes, and it's going to be awkward, and I'm going to realize that I've been doing things in a way that is not in alignment with who I really want to be. And it can be tough. And in that spiritual space, it's really important to me that I'm working on it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And a lot of this conversation started because of ritual, right? And language that we're using in ritual, and how our words are kind of subtly signaling a lot of hierarchical thinking that I didn't think was a part of our organization, but and it may not be, but our words are saying that. And so how are the words divorced from how we're thinking, or are the words a subtle reflection of what we're thinking, even though we're saying we're not thinking that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So this is not, let's take a break here.
So maybe, what do you think about it? Like, let's just leave it. We'll kind of conclude things here, and then we'll hop back on for a part 2 where we talk about the impacts and the use of words and ritual, and the way that impacts how we call the elements, how we work with the native land that we're on, colonization of language, and other things. How does that sound to you?
That sounds brilliant. And then I'd like to maybe cycle back and come back to words, and making peace with, our thinking about words, and tying it up nicely in a nice, beautiful bow, witchy bow.
We could put that bow on my witchy hat.
Yeah, I'd love that. But why don't we go ahead and do our poem? We tend to try to end with a poem or song or something like that. And this is a poem that I found on a blog. The poem is called The Irreversible Power of Words. And it's this is on a poetry site called Deep Underground Poetry. And the author, I'm pretty sure this is not their government name, but they go by on this site Only Human, and it's spelled OWNLY, human, only human. And there's very little information that we can get on this person. They basically say that they're writing to relieve anxiety and to express their love for words. And then for their introduction, they write, "I am no one special, only a human with a desire to write." So that's all we know about them. But if you go to, I'll try to put a link to the site in our show notes, and then you can go and read a little bit more about them. But let's read a little bit of the irreversible power of words. Okay. You can't take back words once spoken. They leave your lips and enter the air, carrying with them the weight of their meaning. They hang there, suspended, waiting for the listener to catch them and interpret them. Once they've been heard, they can never be unheard.
Words have power. They can heal, they can inspire, they can bring joy, but they can also wound, they can harm, they can destroy. And once they've done their damage, there's no erasing them. No amount of apologies or reactions can make them disappear.
I know this all too well. I've said things I regret, things that have haunted me for years, things that have hurt the people I love the most. I wish I could go back and unsay them, take them back into my mouth and swallow them down.
But I can't. I can only try to make amends, to show through my actions that I am truly sorry. And I can try to be more mindful in the future, to think before I speak and choose my words with care.
Because words are precious. They have the power to create and to destroy. And once they're out there, you can't take them back.
Thanks for being out there with us as we navigate the power of words, as we realize that we have more to say and process about these words than we thought we could do in one episode. Thanks for going on this journey with us, and we hope you'll join us for our next episode, which will be part 2.
Glad you could join us.
We hope you have enjoyed the magic that has unfolded here at Witchy Wit.
It would be great if you would help make Witchy Wit possible and get access to exclusive content by donating on Patreon.
We'd love it if you join our Witchy community and enjoy shareable content on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube.
Would you do us a big favor and support us by rating and reviewing us wherever you get your podcasts? It's free and helps witchy folks find us.
Feel free to email us at witchywitpodcast@gmail.com. We love to hear from our community. Reach out and let us know what's brewing in your cauldron.
New episodes are released every second and fourth Friday. Follow us on your favorite podcasting platform so our episodes go right to your playlist. You can listen as you ride your broom.
Stay witchy, y'all!